Peak performance aging starts young. Aging is a fact of life, but old is a mindset. Regular access to flow actually means you're doing your homework and backing up your brain for the future. One of the things that happens that helps us get into flow shows up when we push on all of our skills to the utmost. We want to stretch but not snap. You can't overload the system, can't have too much anxiety. You need enough stimulation that you're fully engaged. If you want to rock till you drop, you need to regularly engage in challenging, creative, and social activities that demand dynamic, deliberate play and take place in novel outdoor environments. A positive mindset towards aging. I am thrilled that the second half of my life is filled with exciting possibility. My best days are ahead of me. That translates into an extra 8 years of healthy longevity. The old idea that I'm too old for this shit is totally wrong. And there are a lot of reasons why.
What does it take to do the impossible? What does it take to level up your game like never before? What does it take for individuals, organizations, for even institutions to achieve paradigm shifting? Nothing is ever the same again. Breakthroughs.
Our mission is to decode the neurobiology of flow and cognitive peak performance. Access the minds of maverick scientists, groundbreaking innovators, and world-leading experts to understand what it takes to achieve ultimate human performance, so you can feel your best, perform your best, and accomplish your boldest goals. I'm your host, Rian Doris, and together with best-selling author Stephen Kotler, I present to you Flow Research Collective Radio.
Joined by New York Times best-selling author, award-winning journalist, executive director of the Flow Research Collective and Park Skier, Stephen Kotler. Stephen is an acclaimed author and journalist renowned for his expertise in flow states, human performance, and action sports. He has dedicated his career to exploring the frontiers of human potential. He is widely recognized for his groundbreaking work on flow, the psychology of optimal human experience. His 11 best-selling books include The Rise of Superman, Stealing Fire, and The Art of Impossible, blending meticulous research, personal anecdotes, and insightful analysis to illuminate how individuals can unlock their full potential. Beyond his writing, Kotler is a highly sought-after public speaker. His remarkable insights into human potential, combined with his passion for adventure, have solidified his status as a thought leader in psychology, neuroscience, and human performance. Stephen gives us the lowdown on his latest book about peak performance aging, Gnar Country, growing old and staying rad. Got to admit, I love the name of the title. The book explores the frontiers of human possibility and how he learned to park ski in his 50s. We're going to be talking about flow research and loads more. Let's jump into it. Hi, Steve. How are you?
How are you?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. Whereabouts are you at the moment?
I'm in Tahoe-ish, Tahoe adjacent, in northern Nevada.
Nice.
Mountains.
And are you guys still getting loads of snow?
We got snow last night.
Oh my God, it's insane, right? It's probably like I've heard it's been one of the and seen from all the posts and everyone sharing photos and videos. Like,
so the craziest thing about it is Gnar Country, the new book, right? Is a lot of it's set in Kirkwood, and it talks about all these sort of rowdy lines, et cetera, et cetera. I would say that 2/3 of those lines don't exist this year. There's so much snow; the whole cliff faces are gone. Like what is normally a 75-foot straight line is now like a boulevard of snow. It's the craziest thing anybody's ever seen. It doesn't make sense. I'm skiing, we're skiing lines that you ski once in 50 years because that's when they open, and it's great fun.
And what are they going to do with the resorts? Are they going to kind of push it back?
Well, it depends on who's in charge. Vail doesn't seem to want to play well with others, and they've decided they're going to pretend this is a normal season and they're just shutting shit down right now. Like literally they're trying to close stuff down, and then the Icon passes are holding out, and Mammoth has basically said we're not closing. So that's where I'll be heading soon.
And do you split your time because you're in New Mexico as well, right? Are you kind of back and forth?
No. We left New Mexico 4 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And I moved back to Tahoe.
Mm-hmm. And what was the reason for coming back?
Among many, it was a combination of two things. It was literally, I started coming back to the Squaw Valley, what was then the Squaw Valley Institute, to give talks.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that I knew more people. I used to live in Tahoe, and I knew more people in Tahoe than I knew in any single place in the world. Like, all my friends were still there. They had never really left, and everybody else had left every place else they'd been. So, like, it was the greatest concentration of people I knew in one spot. And I was in New Mexico, which is amazing. But if you want to get to stuff that's really going to push you and progress you, it's all hiking access. And there's only so many Gnar laps you can do in a day if you're hiking for it. And I wanted lift serve Gnar. I wanted to come to a place where I can get lap after lap after lap after lap and really progress as a skier. So I'm giving you action sport answers. My wife would have a whole different set of criteria here. I'm just sort of giving you the action sport answers, but that was a lot of it for me.
Nice. The book came out in February, Gnar Country, and how's it been last couple of months?
It's been zany, like really fun. It's fun for I think two reasons. The book is about what we could call peak performance, applied peak performance, and applied peak performance aging, right? Mm-hmm. And it's in a sort of a look at the new field of peak performance aging, which is really just about like what's possible in the second half of our life. And two things that I've noticed with this book is Rise of Superman, which was my book about flow and action sports, came out. When I was in the room with action sport athletes and we were talking about this, the room would light up. There was like a temperature change because it was finally like action sport athletes felt like there was a language for this thing they'd been experiencing and really needed to understand to do what they love better, right? And there was a lot of freedom that came out of Rise of Superman. With Gnar Country, I'm seeing the same thing, but it's not just action sport athletes. It's just people suddenly realizing that the second half of their life isn't the prison sentence they were worried about. And there's like a palpable temperature change. The other thing is that people have just taken up like these Gnar style, what we're calling Gnar style quests, right? For me, I decided I was going to teach myself how to park ski in my 50s. But for somebody else, it could be, so I'm getting reports about like my dad's learning to kiteboard in his 70s, or I'm learning to, run my first triathlon in my 80s, or like on and on and on. And the stories are from like age 30 on, really. But it's just people with this impossible challenge, this thing that they didn't want to die having unfulfilled, going for it and figuring out how to get it done. And I'm getting like the reports and the videos and the photos from all over the world that are sort of like pouring in. And that's really cool. It's really kind of amazing, actually.
And has it been just sort of physical kind of missions, or
has
it been mental? Like people wanting to start a business, or
it really like hasn't. I mean, we can get more into the details of it. It turns out that action sports are particularly good for peak performance aging. They tick about 16 of the boxes that you need to tick for peak performance aging. So in a sense, the old idea that like, I'm too old for this shit, this is what we stop doing later on is totally wrong. And there are a lot of reasons why. But I'm not just, what you're really after is kind of unfinished business, that thing you want to get done before you die. And really, it's really about finding a challenge that explodes your traditional mindset towards aging and replaces it with sort of a peak performance mindset. And so we've got a woman who is a very shy, introverted woman who's an artist, and her quest was her first solo show in a gallery. We've seen people sort of start businesses and things like that, though that's hard to separate out from Gnar Country versus what we do at the Flow Research Collective and the trainings we do, because we train a ton of companies, we train a ton of individuals, we train a lot of entrepreneurs. So like those are the people we get to work with all the time. So the action sports, these kinds of things, the creative challenges, that sort of thing are standing out. And we still haven't really gotten our shit together completely to like organize a way to like capture what's actually going on, right? A lot of it's coming in like secondhand through social, and it's interesting, but we'll find a way to capture it all and really start to do something cool with it.
Nice. And kind of, I guess going back, like what sparked your interest in looking at like performance, like peak performance aging?
So my work has always focused on flow, right? Which is an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. And let me just put a little bit broader of a definition around it just because it's helpful. And I'm going to talk a lot about flow. Flow refers to any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You get so focused on what you're doing that everything else just starts to disappear. Sense of self-consciousness, the voice in your head gets really quiet. Time passes strangely. Most of the time, we just get so fascinated by what we're doing, so sucked in and immersed that 5 hours go by in like 5 minutes. And throughout, all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof. Mm-hmm. That's what flow is. At the Flow Research Collective, we study the neurobiology of peak human performance. So what goes on in the brain and the body when people perform at their very best. And we focus on the state of flow because it always shows up during optimal performance. So flow science goes, believe it or not, directly into the science of peak performance aging. And this work goes back almost 50 years. The godfather of flow psychology, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, noticed that. So one of the things that happens that helps us get into flow is state shows up when we push on all of our skills sort of to the utmost, right? You want to stretch but not snap. You can't overload the system, can't have too much anxiety, but you need enough stimulation that you're fully engaged, right? So you're stretching but not snapping. And a couple things that happen in flow. One, learning is massively amplified. There's a bunch of neurobiological reasons, but studies run by the U.S. Department of Defense on soldiers in flow found they learn 250 to 500% faster than normal in flow. So on the other side of a flow state, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi noticed, he's like, wow, you come out the other side and you've onboarded these new skills. You're more adaptive. You're more complex. In fact, and not only are you more adaptive and more complex, flow automatically expands empathy and perspective. So our ability to see things from multiple perspectives, so automatically expands in flow. And wisdom, which is an actual measurable neurobiological trait, also sort of automatically expands in flow. Csikszentmihalyi noticed this a long time ago. And he said, wait a minute, this is the engine of adult development. This is maturity. This is how we grow up as organisms. Holy crap. And wrote tons of books about this, right? Like this was one of his big findings. And it didn't catch fire like some of his other ideas caught fire, but it's in like 6 or 7 of his books, and he was fascinated by it. And researchers picked up on it and drove it forward, myself included, and I started noticing things about learning that seemed to change a little bit around flow. And what we started to uncover is that Csikszentmihalyi figured out that our desire to get into flow, our need for flow, our ability to use flow proneness stays constant throughout your lifetime. But our desire for flow and our need for it stays constant over the lifetime. It's our ability to get into flow shrinks a little bit over time. And there's a number of different reasons, totally trainable. But that's what I started to notice is, hey, wait a minute, there's an undercurrent here. And the second thing I started to notice, I've been around peak performance aging and longevity science and longevity technology and working in this field and writing about it and covering it. And my wife and I were on a hospice care sanctuary for dogs. So like I worked firsthand with some of this stuff for almost 20 years. And what I started to notice is that the really big levers that would extend healthy lifespan and all that sort of stuff had flow baked into them. This was really a deep part of the peak performance aging equation. So it became this sort of natural extension of the work I was doing that got put to a test, because all this stuff was true in the lab. And then it came to a point where I was like, okay, now let's test it. And I was like, if this stuff is all true, older adults should be able to use it to do really extraordinary things, including onboard very difficult, hard to learn skills. Like I decided I was going to teach myself how to park ski in my 50s, which for about 11 different biological reasons. Like once you get to 35, people are like, this is really difficult. Don't do this. 45, it's completely impossible. Forget about it. And by the time you get into your 50s, people just think you're crazy. And I wasn't sure if I was crazy or not, right? I knew that there was all this flow science in the lab, and there was other stuff in other fields that also seemed to back up these ideas. But is this shit going to work in the real world? Let's see. And that's sort of what Gnar Country was. I ran the experiment myself. I had a ski partner. He ran the experiment, got rowdy and amazing results. We then came back a year later. We took 17 older adults, ages 29 to 68, most of whom were intermediate snowboarders and skiers, and used the same core principles. And in 4 session days on the mountain, got them from sort of zero to dangerous. There's only so much park skiing you can learn in 4 days, but we got them incredibly far, a lot farther than most of them ever thought they were going to go. And then we've expanded from there. But those are those experiments, the stories that are told in the book.
And that, I guess, is sort of then looking at like all the different aspects of learning something and then getting into that flow state, right? So it's not just sort of looking at the physical side, it's mental, it's training, and kind of, I guess, breaking it down into all those things, which is sort of, as you get older, people think that, you know, you're just not going to be able to do a certain activity or learn something new.
So the old idea, the book is meant to sort of overturn the bad guy in this story is the traditional idea around aging. And it's everybody's familiar with this. Most of us believe it, right? I like to call it the long, slow rot theory. It's the idea that all of our physical skills decline over time. All of our mental skills decline over time. There's nothing we can do to stop the slide, right? That's the traditional view of aging. And it turns out, like a lot of things in this field, only a small part of that is true. What is true is that our mental and physical skills do decline over time, but there's overwhelming data that's accumulated over the past 20 years that all those skills are use it or lose it skills. And if you never stop training them, you get to hang on to them and even expand them far later in life than anybody thought possible. So that was radical news. And that side, there's 5 categories of fitness that really need to be trained, which is strength, stamina, agility, flexibility, and balance. When people talk about functional fitness, it's those 5 categories. Those 5 categories, if you want a single term for them, this is dynamic movement, right? That's what that is. Now, dynamic movement is particularly special for a couple of reasons. One, if you're engaged in dynamic activities, one, you're training up everything you need to train up over time, right, to preserve. And you're saving yourself a lot of time. The World Health Organization has exact how much should you train. They know for peak performance aging, and it's 150 to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobics of stamina activity a week, 2 strength training days, 3 balance, flexibility, agility days. If you're serious about your training, that's a couple hours of training 5 days a week. Or
is that across board?
Pardon me?
Sorry for interrupting. Is that across the board, like depending on what age you are? So it doesn't matter if you're like late 20s or...
Yeah, so there's 2 things that are really key here. And thank you for asking. It's a great question. Peak performance aging starts young. So like aging is sort of a fact of life, but old is a mindset. And the minute the voice in your head starts to say, I'm too old for this shit, that's where that mindset starts to show up, A. And B, a lot of our physical skills, VO2 max, starts declining in our 20s. Strength starts declining in our early 30s, right? Like, and it sort of goes from there. And if old is anything at all, it's sort of, for everybody, it's going to be different, right? There's a line somewhere in there where you're like, if I'm not training this shit, it's really just fading. Like that's probably where the dividing line is. It's going to be different for everyone. But the point is that like we can rock till you drop, but you sort of want to train for the second half of your life a little bit like a professional athlete. You want to train like a pro. You want to learn to recover like a pro. You have to do it smart. You don't have to do it as hard, but you have to do it as smart, I think. in a sense. And it turns out action sports are one way to do this very in a smart fashion, because you're either training 5 days a week, a couple hours a day, you're finding a single activity that hits multiple boxes. We call this a multi-tool solution at the Flow Research Collective. It's a single tool that solves multiple problems at once. And the reason it matters so much is everybody we train is busy, right? And it's the commonality among everybody. So we can't solve problems one at a time for people. It just takes too damn long. So we need single tools that solve a lot of problems at once. Action sports tend to be great for checking this box. Bonus, here's something cool. When we engage in dynamic motion, when the brain has to sort of like use strength, stamina, and coordination and balance agility at the same time, it doesn't just improve all their physical functions. It produces two things in the brain that are really important for peak performance aging: angiogenesis and neurogenesis. Angiogenesis is the birth of new blood vessels. If you want to stave off cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, you want to preserve mental function, lifelong learning is really key, because when you learn stuff, you make new neural networks. You birth new neurons and make new neural networks. Dynamic motion is really like the brain sort of locks onto it, and we remember it and we learn from it, and it produces angiogenesis, the birth of new blood vessels that supports those new neurons, and neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons. So dynamic motion improves both the brain and the body at really key levels over time, which is why, by the way, the longest lived communities in America, Summit County, Eagle County, and Pitt County in Colorado, which is Vail, Beaver Creek, Aspen, Copper Mountain, A-Basin, all those outdoor communities, all those resort towns. On average in Summit County, Colorado, people live an extra 10 years than they do in the rest of America. So it's a real significant boost to health and longevity.
Are they considered blue zones, like within
They don't.
the US?
They're not considered blue zones. The only blue zone in the US is Loma Linda, California. Which is interesting. And so it seems to be, there's a bunch of different things that boxes that you have to check to count as a blue zone. There is, most of the blue zones have much more homogeneous populations. The Summit County, those don't, right? Loma Linda is a Seventh-day Adventist community. It's very outdoors focused. They do a lot of huge hikes together as a community. So you get the same kind of benefits, but there's also dietary stuff and no alcohol and a handful of things, which is why I think they get the blue zone designation. But interestingly, and they get a blue zone, I think to be a blue zone, it's 9 to 12 years. But these three counties in Colorado would certainly qualify, but they're not considered a blue zone, or they haven't been.
And that's kind of looking at things like, like we say with like dietary requirements, like plant-based and things like that.
So
right?
It's interesting. This is sort of one of the places my research started. Is we were doing stuff with our dogs. We were getting fantastic results with our dogs. We were putting their dogs into flow using a bunch of other sort of low-tech, high-tech solutions, like common sense nutritional solutions and just really basic stuff, but getting amazing results. Our dogs were living like they would come in hospice care with late-stage cancer and heart disease, and it's really sick, and we get like 3 to 5 more years. And they were supposed to live a month or two, and we were like, wow, these are great results. Over 700 dogs have sort of moved through our facilities, so we saw it a lot. And we started asking questions about, like, why is this happening? Is it just dogs? Could it happen for humans? And it turns out there's a giant movement in canine welfare to double pet lifespan. So there's a ton of people who are working on these exact problems and looking at things that we were looking at. So big community there. That was great. And then when I started looking into, hey, who's doing this work in humans? It was the blue zones. It was the same work, and they were finding the same things. We were looking at lifestyle changes. And when we started mapping what we were doing with dogs and what other people were doing with dogs onto what was happening in blue zones, they mapped in really, like, it was almost one-to-one. And that was one other thing that sort of kindled my interest in this field. I was like, holy crap, this stuff is working in dogs. It's also working in people. And when you get under the hood in the blue zones, there's stuff I care about. Like, there's a lot of time in nature, and why does that work? And those kinds of questions. It was fascinating. But yeah, blue zones are basically about lifestyle hacks, right? You want to live with passion, purpose, regular access to flow. You want to move your body. and probably not too much. Where the blue zones get into trouble and get sort of controversial is where people try to look at the dietary things people are doing and then turn them into supplements and then sell the supplements, right? And there's a lot of controversy around that. And it's interesting also because I want to say, because people get this wrong about this is one of the myths about sort of peak performance aging. When people get into this stuff and they get into it at, biohackers get into it in their 20s, right? Like people get
that was what I was going to ask you. That was going to be my next.
I mean, like people get into it at every age. This is not like Gnar Country isn't like, it's got the word old in the title, but I mean in that sort of punk rock way of like, you just got to talk about it out loud. You know what I mean? You got to claim it a little bit. Otherwise it's going to eat you. But like, I wrote this book for people sometimes a lot younger than me because I would see it on the mountain. I would see it while mountain bike. I would see like this mindset of old start to show up and people who were like 20, 30 years younger than me. It was freaking me out too. But anyways, if you're doing this stuff in your 20s, you're a biohacker, right? And what's interesting is this. Here's peak performance aging in a single sentence. And what you're going to notice about this sentence is there's no biohacking, there's no supplements, there's no diet. And it's not that the supplements, the diet, all that stuff is bad. It's that it's cutting edge. We don't really know. I mean, dietary caloric restriction, we know a little bit, but what's downstream from it, we don't I'm taking a bunch of those supplements to test them out too, but like, it's cutting edge experimental stuff that we're going to know if it works 20 years from now. And the track record of longevity medicine is they bat like 10 to 20% correct and 80% wrong. So like, unless there's going to be some radical improvement in batting average, a lot of this stuff is nonsense. What do we know for real? What do we know that has 100 years of science or 50 years of science and millions of studies? If you want to rock till you drop, you need to regularly engage in challenging, creative, and social activities that demand dynamic, deliberate play. And we can talk about what deliberate play means, but you get the idea. Dynamic, deliberate play. And dynamic is that term for strength, stamina, flexibility, balance, agility. It's all those at once and take place in novel outdoor environments. That is literally peak performance aging in a single sentence. We could talk about what all of those things are about and why. But what I want you to notice is that all the stuff that the biohackers are doing in their 20s and people are really leaning into in their 50s and 60s, they're not the big tools. These are the huge tools. Let me have positive mindset towards aging. I am thrilled that the second half of my life is filled with exciting possibility. My best days are ahead of me. That translates into an extra 8 years of healthy longevity. Incredibly well-established fact. Maintaining robust social ties into our later years, that's an additional 7 years of healthy longevity. This is what we know. These are the things that work. And we understand the neuroimmunology underneath all of it, but these are the big levers. There's nothing dietary that gives you those kinds of results. This is sort of what they figured out in the blue zones. Hey, wait a minute, there's about 12 years that seem to be up for grabs. How do we start getting at it? And peak performance aging just turns that up a couple of notches and really adds a level of like neurobiology underneath it.
And that's something, I mean, I'm approaching 41 in a couple of weeks, and I think it's only the past couple of years where maybe when I was like in my teens, I was skateboarding the whole time, like late teens, started surfing, and then just got obsessed with surfing, but wouldn't stretch too much, wouldn't do the things that you kind of know you should be doing for longevity and all that sort of stuff. And that's why I was just like super curious about, like, now when you kind of see the research, when you look at it and people that are in their 20s and then 30s and 40s and 50s and kind of looking at these different, I don't know if you call them age groups or these different decades, these times of your life, whether people now are sort of looking into it going like, if they do want to kind of do the things that they love to do and do their passions, sports, whatever it may be, and sort of to continue that on, do you think it's now people like looking at and starting earlier? And if that is the case, like what kind of advice would you give if people say if someone listening is like in their mid-20s?
Let's talk about a handful of things that put some context around this. And I'm going to start again, not where you think, but the physical stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're going to really start with the psychological and the mental side of the game. Yeah. So cool fact about aging is that there are these, starting in our late 40s, there are these really, nobody talks about this, nobody knew about this until fairly recently, there are really beneficial changes in the brain that take place. We hear about all the bad stuff, but there are actually good things that happen in the brain in our 40s and 50s. Some of it is certain genes only get activated by experience. So there's epigenetic things that turn them on and they only start coming on. Some of it is that around our early 50s, the brain starts to recruit underutilized regions. You've got enough laps that your brain goes, oh, okay, we're not using this area, but let's use this. Let's back up some other systems. Let's give us some redundancy. Let's store some stuff over there. And the big deal is the two halves of the brain start to talk to each other like never before. Normally they sort of work, they're not in opposition, but they do different things and they start to come together, and it starts in our 50s and peaks in our 80s. So these are really cool, beneficial brain changes, but it turns out they're not guaranteed. It turns out if we want, these are one of the big reasons that peak performance aging is possible is because of these brain changes. We gain access to 3 new levels of intelligence that were not possible before. We gain, and downstream from that intelligence, and the levels of intelligence, for example, we gain multi-perspectival thinking, which is the ability to see things from multiple perspectives. And it's just not possible beforehand. We put down black and white thinking. We start to realize that black and white is like this folly of youth, and really everything is shades of gray and nuance and subtlety. And we start to see all that. And we also get big picture thinking, right? For the very first time, we really get to see the forest through the trees. These levels of intent, and by the way, you test people on IQ tests and whatever, you see them go up as a result of these levels of thinking. Yeah. Downstream from this are whole new levels of creativity, whole new levels of empathy, and whole new levels of wisdom. So these are the so-called cognitive superpowers of aging. They're not guaranteed. If you want them, there are certain gateways you got to pass through, and the gateways show up in like our 30s, 40s, 50s, and then there's shit you got to do in your 60s and 70s to hang on to them. So this is why when I said, hey, Csikszentmihalyi, I figured out flow is the engine of adult development. These are adult development issues. Like, oh, wait a minute. Like, we need certain things to grow up properly. So in our 20s, by age 30, you sort of have to have solved the crisis of identity. You got to know who you are in the world. What are your values? What do you believe in? You don't have to have all the answers, but you got to have enough that you can start steering, right? Right. By age 40, people describe this different ways. Simply put, you have to figure out how to live with a lot of passion, purpose, and flow. What economists say is you need to match fit or match quality, which is a match between who you are, your identity, which is one of the reasons that knowing that by 30 matters so much, and what you do in the world, how you spend your time, your avocation, your vocation, that sort of stuff. You want an alignment between who you are, your values, and what you do with your time and passion, purpose, and flow, etc. By 50, you actually have to forgive those people who have done you harm, and you have to set down shame, and you got to forgive yourself. And those are all really interesting and weird and not the kind of hurdles you would think about. And then it even gets weirder. If you want to actually unlock those cognitive superpowers, the way to do it is creative thinking. So creative thinking could be, I'm going to drive a new route to work, or I'm going to learn how to play chess, or I'm going to learn how to code computers, or I'm going to learn how to draw, or I'm going to learn how to cook. Any of these things sort of are unlock the creative decision-making process, and that's what sort of unlocks these new thinking styles. And then if you want to hang on to them, 2 things matter. You have to train down physical fragility, because physical fragility starting in our 50s, it gets a lot worse, right? And so if you're not training the 5 categories of dynamic motion, what good is a bunch of cognitive superpowers if you can't use your body, right? And simultaneously, you actually have to train down risk aversion. Risk aversion increases over time. Naturally, there's a bunch of different reasons, including like brain thickness, which shrinks over time. And as a result, processing speed slows down. When the brain processing speed slows down, we get a little more cautious, right? Yeah. And so you have to train against that, because risk aversion produces fear. fear blocks multi-perspectival thinking. It blocks empathy. It makes us selfish. It blocks creativity. When we're scared, we find safe, true, conservative solutions, the thing that has worked a million times. We don't get super creative and innovative, right? So all these superpowers get blocked by the fear that shows up with risk aversion. You have to constantly train against it. So there's literally stuff you got to basically do every decade throughout your lifespan to really do this psychologically. Simultaneously, certain cognitive skills start slipping in our 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s, and certain physical skills. And the VO2 max starts declining in our 20s. So you want to start training VO2 max in your 20s. You just want to regularly, and all that means is mixed in somewhere with what you're doing, you have intense bursts of physical activity, right? It's a couple minute bursts is enough, right? If you're doing downhill mountain bike or downhill skiing and you're doing top to bottom laps in America, it's typically 7 minutes on skis, 8 minutes on a bike kind of thing.
Yep.
And if you're pegging it, that's VO2 max training, right? Like, so you want to start doing that early, and you don't really want to fall off on that one. You want to start eating healthy young, right? You don't want to too much sugar, stay away from it. Too much processed food, stay away from it. I've got no other dietary advice. Stay hydrated, right? Those things matter. Probably the most important, regenerative medicine is moving really fast, right? And medicine in general is moving really fast. It's doubled human lifespan over the 20th century, right? We doubled human lifespan. It's dropping again in bits and pieces post-COVID. There's issues. This is not just a clean rise, but in general, we're moving forward. And we've accelerated a lot of the past 20 to 30 years. Cancer and heart disease are no longer a death sentence, right? Most of the time we can figure it out. We can solve it. Now, Alzheimer's, dementia, cognitive decline, those are the new death sentences. So essentially we figured out how to get through our 70s, which is like the times that cancer and heart disease really takes us out. But if you make it to your 80s, now you've got like the brain stuff to deal with. But it turns out Alzheimer's and cognitive decline and dementia are also not inevitable. This is incredibly cool. And it's even better when I tell you that if we want to stave off Alzheimer's and cognitive decline, the research is really clear. You have to build up what's known as a healthy cognitive reserve. Essentially, the part of our brain that erodes is the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's right behind our forehead. It does higher cognitive functions, executive functions live there, sense of morality, willpower, long-term decision-making, logical decision-making. That's all there. And it's evolutionarily, it's the newest part of the brain, most vulnerable to decline. So if you want to preserve its function, what you want is to create new neurons there and have them create new neural networks. And it turns out in the prefrontal cortex, that is where we store both expertise and wisdom. And it's the cool thing about both expertise and wisdom is the brain doesn't ever learn one way. When think of the difference is expertise is like skill sets, facts, strategies, tactics, and wisdom is like emotional intelligence writ large, self-control, emotional regulation, all that stuff, social intelligence. That's all wisdom. But the point is that whenever we gain expertise or wisdom, it creates these really diverse networks and redundant networks across the prefrontal cortex. Actually, expertise and wisdom are neuroprotective against cognitive decline, to use the big fancy words. It means if you want to preserve your brain, you have to really use your brain. And there's all kinds of cool studies that say like you gain an additional 8% protection for each sort of new leisure activity you add. And this could be like chess or crossword puzzles or you're in a debate club or you learn to ski or like that sort of stuff. But what you see over and over, all the researchers studying, this is why I'm mentioning all this because you're asking questions about your 20s. Every one of the researchers who has studied this has looked at it and said, holy crap, start young. Like, don't wait. Your 50s and 60s. If you can avoid it, start learn. Like lifelong learning is so key. And it's like, you have to understand that like, where this stuff started showing up is these huge studies where people would donate their brains to science, and they would test these people on cognitive function for 20 years, and they were totally healthy and dynamic and alive. And then they would autopsy the brain, and they'd figure out that the brains were filled with Alzheimer's, plaques and tangles, and the brains were a mess. And yet they exhibited none of the symptoms of the disease. So the question was, why? And it was expertise, wisdom, other things mattered. Exercise. Also, this is also where the first hints that exercise is neuroprotective. Do you remember that when I grew up, dumb jocks were dumb? Remember that? And then there was something happened. Suddenly jocks were not dumb, right? And what changed? One of the first things that changed was these studies that showed that exercise protects against brain decline. And they started to realize that there's a direct relationship between the body and the brain in these kinds of things. That's where it started to erode. The idea of the dumb jock started to erode. It came out of peak performance aging studies. It didn't come out of studies of fitness.
And I guess now, like with everyone, I don't want to, I mean, that term busy gets thrown around quite a bit, but like coming up with these creative ideas and then putting time and sort of thinking about, like dynamic motion and performance and all these different things. I mean, what kind of, if you did have any kind of advice with that in this time, like when people feel overwhelmed and anxious and all these kind of things and stressed, which all then has this negative impact.
It does. And from a one-stop shopping, what's the one thing that matters the most? What for peak performance aging, for fighting back against burnout, and everything we're sort of talking about, what's the one tool? So this is where flow really, really matters. And I'm going to give you a big picture look at what happens in flow. And then you're looking at me like, what are you talking about, buddy? And I get this. So when we get to burnout, when we get to overload, if we want to fix it, you literally have to recarve new pathways in the brain. Mm-hmm. It's because like every memory goes to anxiety, everything goes to stress, there's no relief in sight. So how do you get relief when there's no relief in sight? Flow is the single most important tool. You don't want to start that. You want to start by calming down your nervous system a little bit with just like the daily practices. The three best ways to calm your nervous system down are daily gratitude practice, daily mindfulness practice, and regular exercise. And you need gratitude practice is 5 to 7 minutes is literally what it takes. And I'm not going to bother to take the time to talk about all the neurobiology of gratitude and how it works and why it works. But if you want to calm down, one of the very best tools available, and we've done tons of work on it. And it turns out that regular gratitude practice also makes you more flow prone. So it's a multi-tool as well. Mindfulness for stress reduction, you need literally like 11 minutes a day. So, and exercise, if you're exercising for anxiety, you want to exercise until the brain and the body release nitric oxide, which is a gaseous signaling molecule. It flushes stress hormones out of your system. It shows up at the front end of a flow state, but it also shows up about 20 to 40 minutes into exercise, depending on your fitness. You know it's there because your lungs have expanded, right? Suddenly you have your wind and it got quiet upstairs. And that's a signal. That's a signal that the stress hormones are gone from your system. You're really close to the front edge of flow at that point, but sort of besides the point, that's what you're doing to kind of manicure your nervous system. The next thing you want to do is double down on your primary flow activity. And this is a peak performance tool. This is a burnout tool, and this is a peak performance aging tool, and all for very similar reasons. Let me take them one at a time. So let me start with when we move into flow, not only does it push all those stress hormones out of our system, you get the same nitric oxide reaction, it resets the nervous system back to sort of zero to homeostasis. And one of the things that happens in burnout is it's like the thermostat, the emotional thermostat can't find normal anymore. So you have to retrain the brain. Hey, this is normal. This is zero. This is calm. Yeah. Flow does that automatically. So one, it really helps there. Two, you get this big boost of neurochemicals that underpin the state. They do a bunch of different things in the brain and the body. One of the things they do is they boost the immune system. So You're boosting the immune system, you're resetting the nervous system. This is one of the reasons flow plays a role in health and longevity, because this immune system boost. Another thing to know is that flow provides a massive amplification in mood. It also amplifies creativity, and that heightened mood and creativity will outlast the flow state by a day, maybe two. So a lot of people will train with us at the Flow Research Collective. They want more flow in their life because they want flow at work, right? They want to be more creative at work. They want to be more productive at work. They want more focus at work. That's like why people come to us. One of the things we have them doing is double down in a primary flow activity, because flow is it's a focusing skill. It's a way of focusing the brain. So like training the brain, it's easier. If I love skiing, that's my primary flow activity, the thing I've been doing since I was a little kid that puts me into flow most of the time, right? So I go skiing on a Sunday, my chance of getting into flow is really high. So I'm relaxing myself, I'm calming down. The next day I go to work, I've got heightened mood, I've got heightened creativity, and I've been training the brain to focus and drop into flow. So I've got an easier time of getting into flow at work. So it bleeds over. But from a reset the nervous system methodology, it's usually about the best tool you can reach for, because primary flow activity, like, to put it differently, flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. There are about 26 in total. Everybody has certain triggers that work the best for them. That's what their primary flow activity is packed with. Those are like, essentially, we can break them all down, talk about the neurobiology and explain it all, but like, that's essentially what's going on here. This is an activity, and it may change over time, but we really have people figure out what it is and double down on it. And from a peak performance aging standpoint, this all plays an additional super critical role, which is why I think Gnar style adventures are really important for people as we age. They tend to produce a lot of flow, but additional bonus in flow, two things are really important to know. Well, aging biologically, there are 9 known causes of aging, 9 reasons we get older, and genetic instability, telomere attrition, et cetera, et cetera. But what they all share in common is stress and inflammation. That's the one commonality, is stress and inflammation. So anything that fights stress and lowers inflammation is an anti-aging tool. So flow is this enormous reset to the nervous system. That's phenomenal. That's really cool. That has a big anti-aging function. Even better, when we experience extremely positive emotions, we increase the production of T cells and killer T cells. T cells are the cells that boost the immune system. Killer Ts and natural killers fight tumors and other sick cells. So disease of aging, right? They directly target it. 2 of the very best feelings humans encounter are a sense of mastery and a sense of control. And both come built in with flow. One of the ways scientists define flow is by these 6 core phenomenological characteristics, way the state makes you feel. And so one of the things that flow is it's a signal of mastery. It's a signal I've mastered a new skill. I've onboarded a bunch of stuff. I've leveled up my game. It's a sign of mastery. In fact, there's an evolutionary argument that flow developed because it's so helpful for the human body to have a sign of mastery. So one, mastery is this incredibly powerful, positive feeling that boosts T cells and natural killer cells in the body. 2, we know that mastery, expertise, and wisdom are neuroprotective against cognitive decline. So regular access to flow actually means you're doing your homework and backing up your brain for the future. And this matters at every age, right? You can see that. And finally, flow is peak performance, right? But we don't see, that's not our experience. Our experience is, holy crap, I can control things I can't normally control, right? Like my words as a writer are doing things they don't normally do, or as a skier, I'm suddenly, putting turns where I don't normally dance down knife at 50-degree ridges, you know what I mean, kind of thing. Yeah. And that feeling of control also is delicious. We love it. And it boosts T cells and natural killer cells. So all these things stack up into flow as this really important peak performance tool and peak performance aging tool. And it's the peak performance aging tool that sort of matters at every age. So you said, what's the one thing, right? You can see now, like 20s and on, it really matters. And that was also why the idea that our ability to get into flow, which may decline over time, and that was one of the methodologies, like art was developed to combat that, why that matters so much too.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of brings us up to then looking at Gnar Country and having that mission and learning how to park ski. I mean, did you have that, like you've skied since you were little, you were saying, like, have you thought about that? Like, was that like something that you kind of planned a long time ago, or it sort of came more recently? And then the research developed around it, right?
I spent my 20s chasing big mountain skiers, professional big mountain skiers around. I started out as a journalist. Action sports were one of my beats. And, you focus on particular sports that, I was a surfer. I was a little bit of a windsurfer, but I was a better surfer. So I focused a lot on surfing, a little bit on mountain biking, and a lot on skiing, and chased professional athletes around mountains. And so all my ski goals were like mountain goals. There was not park skiing was just starting to sort of become a thing. And I moved out of skiing. I broke myself so much. When you're not a professional athlete, you chase pros around, you break a lot of bones. And I just broke too many bones for a while. And I switched into rock climbing and surfing for about a decade to sort of fix my body, and then came back to skiing in the end. But I had unfinished ski business, like big mountain stuff. So that was where I put all my energy. And that was my time in New Mexico. And there weren't really, where the places I was skiing in New Mexico, they didn't really have terrain parks, or they weren't very good terrain parks. And so I just sort of ignored it. And it was never a thing until I moved back to Tahoe. And it was the year that COVID sort of closed the resorts. And it didn't start with, it started with a bunch of questions about peak performance aging, and a bunch of, like, they shut down the resorts, and I wanted to keep skiing, and I was losing my mind. And it's a long story. It's in the book. I'd worked 9 years without a break. I'd literally 9 years to try to get my family to Tahoe so I could move and figure it out. And I was going to take 2 months off and just do nothing but ski. And literally, I hadn't had a vacation in 9 years. I was burned out beyond belief. And I had to publish a book, and then the book tour was going to end, and I was finally going to I was just going to take March and April and May off. And I finally got to my break, and I got COVID. I was one of the first cases, and they closed the resorts. And now I'm like everybody else. Like, there's a pandemic. I'm freaking out. I'm running a company. I got 100 people who work for me. I'm trying to figure out how to, like, they can keep their jobs and not to go bankrupt. And, like, I'm doing all the stuff that everybody else is doing. Yeah. And yet I'm so pissed that I can't ski, that every day I'm getting angrier, and it's not going away. Right. This is an action sports podcast, so I can tell you the full story. It's not going away. And I'm starting to yell at my dogs, and I'm starting to be bitchy with my wife and my friends and my coworkers and you know what I mean? And, like,
just getting snappier, right? And just kind of
snappier. And it's because I can't ski. First of all, I'm too sick. I'm too sick. I can't go hiking. I'm still sick. But, like, they stole my season. And I was like, well, what did they take from me? And I was like, oh, they took progress. And I was like, what? Like, my time, I felt like my time, like, I'm getting older, my window of opportunity is closing, and I got unfinished business in skiing in general, as an athlete in general, as a person in general. And there's all this stuff in peak performance aging that says all this shit should be possible. So what happens if we crank up the gas? And I realized, I was hiking my dogs in the backcountry, and it was literally, I live near an abandoned gold mine, and there are these huge tailing piles, enormous. And I'm looking at them, and I'm like, wow, those are big enough to ski. And I was like, can you ski tailing piles? And I was like, I'm not going to be able to even, like, learn turns or anything. I was like, but they're big enough for, like, I was like, can I build a jump? And I was like, no, I know what falling under it feels like. I'm a mountain biker. Like, that's not going to get any better. I was like, but what about a rail setup? And so that was where it started. Is I was like, let's try to build a rail setup in the abandoned gold mine behind my house in Tahoe in the summer. And then I found a camp, a park skiing camp that had one adult session that was still running during COVID up on Mount Hood. And so I was like, okay, I'll start training on rails. Who cares that I never thought rails was a thing I wanted to do, but let's try it. Right. And I'm not supposed to be able to do it. There's like 9 biological reasons why I'm not supposed to be able to learn this in my 50s. So let's just see if it's possible. And that was sort of where it started. Right. Gnar Country is the end result of that process, but it started like anything else, just like a little obsession that started to grow, and it just kept growing.
I mean, it definitely is. Like, it makes me think like I want to so I started mountain biking during COVID because they banned surfing like where I am, couldn't go. So dusted out of this old mountain bike and got into it. And then exactly like you were saying, like as you feel, I mean, maybe like if that was 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been thinking in a certain way, which I was. Like I just came back from like a mountain bike park over in Easter, and there was like 10-year-olds just sending it on like, you know, these 15-foot like road gaps and stuff. And I'm looking at it going like, no, I'm gonna go around this thing. But it's sort of having that mission or having that goal to learning something, and it could be anything.
Well, it was also
kind of
you know, the data, the stuff in the lab, the stuff I was looking at really said, hey, wait a minute, there's a different way to approach these kind of gnarly activities in the second half of your life. Once fear starts setting up, once these skills start slowing down a little bit, there's a different way of approaching the challenge and a different sort of set of goals. I didn't want to become like Alex Hall, right? That was never Eileen Gu, right? I wasn't like, that wasn't what I wanted was to be able to creatively interpret the mountain. If I saw an interesting feature anywhere on the mountain, I want to be able to do something cool with it. The park was one way of doing that, right? But I wanted to learn in the park and turn the mountain into my slope style course. And the reason was, and maybe I'll sort of close here because I know we're running out of time, but I'll tell you a lot. Like, this is really the one thing that turned all of this from a backyard project into oh shit, I got to do this, is I was talking to Godfather of Flow Psychology, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It was the last conversation we had before he died. And he obviously played a pretty big role in my life. And this is my field, and he's sort of the godfather of the field. And the last conversation we had, I'd asked him a question about the role that action sports had played in his life, because he was always a lifelong mountaineer and rock climber. And I was reading these early transcripts of these interviews that were in Italian he did, and they translated them into English. And he was like name dropping Yosemite Valley rock climbers from the 60s in them. Not intentionally, but he had mentioned and I was like, he would only know these names if he was really in the mix. Yeah. Like, these are not guys and so I called him. I was like, dude, you got to tell me the role and we hadn't talked in a couple of years, and there's this huge pause. And I knew, by the way, he was sick. He was in his 80s. He had a stroke, and I called to check on his health, but I had this crazy question. I want to know the role that action sports played in his flow research, because he talks about work with artists, and you know what I mean? He didn't talk about it that much. And so I asked him, and there's this long pause, huge pause, like 2 minutes long. And I'm terrified. I think I've offended him. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why he's paused for so long. And he finally says, Stephen, you got to be careful. And at this point, I think, oh my God, has his brain wrote what he's lost the plot, right? Like, oh shit. And I was like, what do you mean I got to be careful? He's like, you do something your whole life for flow, and then you get to my age and forget about climbing rocks, forget about climbing mountains. Some days I can't get out of bed. You need a backup plan. You got to be careful. You need a backup plan for flow. And this was literally like, he wasn't talking like, this is sort of like mentors to, this was like one flow junkie to another saying, dude. And my plan for the second half of my life was really simple. I was going to keep skiing big lines, right? That was my plan. I had a single, and what he was saying is, he's like, dude, your plan is dumb. Get a backup plan. And I was like, okay. So my main entrance into flow is big mountain riding. And he's saying, don't have one way in over time. I decided if I learned how to park ski, even though the learning curve getting good, there was going to be a high cost. Once I got good, what I had was this entire new tool set that allowed me to interpret every level of terrain, right? And a lot of it had to do with flow states have triggers. So you want more flow in your life. The triggers are your toolkit. Risk is a flow trigger. This is one of the reasons why action sports tend to produce so much flow. Flow follows focus. All the triggers drive focus, drives focus, attention to the now. Risk focuses our attention right here, right now, right? This could be intellectual risk, creative risk, emotional risk, social risk, physical risk also. But creativity is also a flow trigger. So when you link ideas together, what risk gives us is dopamine. That's what's driving it. When we link ideas together and you like do a crossword puzzle, get an answer right, that little rush of pleasure you get, that's dopamine. It's what you get when you link ideas together. When you look at a terrain feature, you've been learning how to mountain bike, you now know, you like look at, you're like, oh, that's a cool berm. I could use it like a wall ride, right? Yeah. That means something to you, right? That's creativity. And it actually produces dopamine. So I was like, wait a minute, if I can learn how to park ski, I can do like mini creative interpretations of terrain features, little snow berms on the side and little jumps and side hits, and use that as a way to drive myself into flow. That's a hell of a lot safer than only having to ski big lines. So that was the thing that finally kicked me over, is I was like, and I've also started to draw and learn how to play piano, and there's more to my backup plan than just this, but that was what kicked me over. And I was like, okay, this has got to be a thing I do. So
I like that thing about the backup plan. I know my wife's like, what happens if you get injured, and you can't do these sports, which you do. It's just like, oh, I'll recover. And then I kind of, I do them again, but they're like learning.
We do a lot of, so at the Flow Research Collective, and we always start, even with peak performance aging, like we train people in flow first, and then we train them in peak performance aging second, like, cause flow is still the foundation of it. But one of the things, folks that we tend to train a lot of is retiring athletes, including action sport athletes, and retiring spec ops. Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Rangers, Green Berets. And it's people who live in these high flow, danger fueled lifestyles. And how do you, and often the secret tends to be some level of creativity, right? You need creativity, and this trade-off shift between risk and physical risk and creative risk tends to be the healthiest one. And then we also teach people how to go back into action sport, like how to approach action sports in the second half of your life in a more sustainable way.
Yeah. Super interesting. If people want to reach out, or if they want to find out more about the book, or I encourage everyone to get hold of a copy, what's the best way?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different ways. If you're interested in the book, GnarCountry.com is the website for the book. You can, by the way, the peak performance aging experiment that I was talking about, where we took those 17 older adults, we had a National Geographic cameraman follow us around, and we recorded everything. It was one of the ways we measured progress, because we used the standard like FIS governing body and skiing like measure of like freestyle progress that they use in the Olympics and the X Games and whatever. And we just applied it to like our students, but we had to videotape everything. So we made it like a 6-minute fun video you can see about the experiment. So you don't have to take my word for any of this. You can check out what it looks like. There's also a really fun introduction to park skiing video for those who don't know there, and a bunch of cool add-on bonuses that I think they were supposed to come down because there was a pre-sale campaign, but they're still up there, and we're gonna keep them up there for a little while. So you get like $1,800 in free pre-performance training bonuses just on that website alone, if you want to order a copy of the book through there or anywhere books are sold. And I'm StephenKotler.com. FlowResearchCollective.com is our organization. If you're interested in training with us for any of the flow stuff, you want to learn more about that stuff, easy URL to remember, getmoreflow.com, and you can sign up for a free hour-long coaching call with a member on my team and see if this is right for you. So that's all that. We've done the marketing. Check.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time coming on.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.